Hi, my name's Lara. I'm an avid knitter, and on this channel I want to share my passion for knitting and wool. This video is going to be a bit different as I'm going to talk about synthetic fibres, the real cost of synthetic fibres, and how terrible they are. Synthetic fibres like acrylic, polyester and nylon, which are widely used in the textile industry, are derived from petroleum and are essentially plastic. These fibres have only been around for the past century or so, but they are now dominant in clothing production. Synthetic clothes have now become the norm, and most people are wearing plastic against their skin every single day without even realizing it. I did for years until I realized just a few years ago that my wardrobe was full of plastic, and I decided to switch to natural fiber clothing. Of course, the rise of synthetic clothing is going to have serious consequences because synthetic fibers come from a lab and are made using chemicals. A big concern is the shedding of microplastics. All fibers shed, whether natural or synthetic, which means that tiny fibers will break off the fabric. In the case of a wool jumper, for example, this is not going to be an issue because wool is totally natural and biodegradable, which means that these tiny fibers that break off can return to the earth, can return to nature without causing any harm. However, this is not the case of synthetic clothing because synthetic clothing is plastic and sheds microplastics that do not biodegrade and persist in the environment for decades. The shedding occurs throughout the garment's entire life cycle, but it is increased with friction, agitation and heat, and a tremendous amount of microplastics are released when synthetic clothing is washed in the washing machine. Synthetic clothing is the second biggest contributor to microplastic pollution in the world, which is huge. These microplastics end up everywhere, in rivers, oceans, lakes, drinking water, soil, wildlife. They end up in our food and ultimately in our bodies, which is really disturbing to think of. And it's really heartbreaking to see plastic pollution harm wildlife and disrupt entire ecosystems. Another question that arises when it comes to synthetic clothing is what happens to these garments at the end of their life cycle once they are disposed of. The sad truth is that for the most part they end up in landfill, and because they do not biodegrade, they continue to pollute the beautiful planet we live on. Another concern is the chemicals used in the production of synthetic clothing. Synthetic fibers go through very heavy chemical processing. Synthetic clothing now commonly contains formaldehyde and PFAs that are classified as cancer-causing agents. And by the way, PFAs are also known as forever chemicals because they persist forever. There seems to be a double standard in the textile industry wherein the dangerous chemicals used to produce synthetic clothing are considered toxic by manufacturers and public health institutions, but the clothing produced with these chemicals is deemed safe to wear directly on your skin every single day. But the truth is the skin can and will absorb these toxic chemicals, and they will then accumulate in tissue and organs and can cause serious health issues like hormone disruption, skin irritation, reproductive and developmental issues, and even cancer. So synthetic clothing is terrible both for the environment we live in and ourselves. And the health of our environment and our own health go hand in hand. We cannot separate one from the other. We cannot thrive in a polluted environment, and anything that we do to support nature ultimately supports us, and we must be stewards of the earth and be conscious of the choices that we make every day. I think one of the reasons why synthetic clothing became so popular is because it was sold as convenient. But just because something is convenient doesn't mean that it's good or better. In the case of synthetic clothing, it is short-term convenience at the cost of a long-term disaster. Also, because synthetic clothing is much cheaper to produce than clothing made from natural fibers, they are often cheaper to buy, so people can buy more for less, which fuels this never-ending quest for more that is so prevalent in our society. What is happening in the textile industry is very saddening and worrying, but I do want to finish on a positive note. The good news is that we already have the solution. We do not need any innovation or breakthroughs. The solution is simply to return to natural fibers. Fibers like cotton, linen, wool, my favorite, that humans have been using since long before synthetic fibers appeared on the market. I am a firm believer that nature provides us with everything we need, and textiles are no exception. And what is really exciting is that there is so much potential for us to create not only a sustainable textile industry, but a regenerative one where clothing comes from nature and can return to nature, one where we work closely with farmers and are connected to the land. And it is so exciting to think about what could be and what a wonderful world we could create for ourselves. So I am really excited and optimistic about the future and the inevitable wool revival that is going to happen in the coming years.